All right, so I have an issue, right? If I say to someone like, "Yeah, I'll do a video on that," like it will not leave my brain until I've done a video on that. And I've said to about 5 different people that I would do a video on After the Hunt, but every single week has been super busy for me. Things are finally quieting down now. So let's talk about After the Hunt. I did see this a little late initially. I was on my honeymoon at the time, and then, I got back, finally caught up with it, felt like it wasn't particularly relevant, but I feel like now, revisiting it is almost interesting now that all the like hype and discourse and hate of the movie has kind of like simmered down a little. And I just find it a really fascinating, bewildering movie. I think it's better than a lot of people say, but at the same time, I can kind of see the problems people have with it. It's a really fascinating movie. It's coming from Luca Guadagnino, who brought us Challenges, Bones and All, Queer, Call Me By Your Name, which are movies I absolutely love. His modern run is genuinely unbelievable. And then mixed in there is After the Hunt, his most recent one, which definitely feels a little odd, a little strange, but at the same time, I really admire it. For those of you who don't know the plot, we're following the story of Alma. She is a college professor who's dealing with a scandal at her college, her university, right? Because a student of hers, Maggie, is accusing a professor that Alma has close ties to of sexual misconduct, SA, right? And I think what really throws people away from this movie is initially going into it, you hear that premise and you're like, cool, it's going to be like a David Fincher-like sort of procedural into what happens when someone gets accused of assault. We're going to explore if the accusation is real or not. We're going to see some investigative stuff. Absolutely not. This movie is less interested about whether Hank did it or not. It's kind of leaving it up to you as the audience to decide. Although I will say, I think there are moments where it makes it abundantly clear. But this movie is way more obsessed with how people are reacting to this situation. The difference in generational reaction, the difference between the way Alma reacts to this situation, how young students react to this situation. It's really interrogating why we are the way we are, essentially. I find this movie infinitely fascinating because, yes, the plot is kind of loose and all over the place, and it'll just kind of like meander and pivot in really strange directions. But I find the exploration of these characters, these weird, flawed, strange, messy characters, really interesting and fascinating. Like, it's not a perfect movie, but I'm not going to lie to you. Like, when the ending reveal comes to do with Alma's character, I was sitting there kind of transfixed. It's like I've spent so much intimate time with these characters doing stuff I am confused as to whether I care about or not, that I am weirdly drawn in. That's the thing I like about this movie, is I find it weirdly hypnotic. I think the material itself is juicy enough, right? The way everyone is handling this situation, and like, wait, that felt a little weird. Is that the truth? Is that the truth? Why would they say that now and not before? What the hell is going on? Like, so much time is spent of you having to do your own detective work and being like, I smell bullshit, but I can't figure out why, because you are experiencing this situation through Alma's eyes. You don't get to be in the room when it happened or when it didn't happen. You don't get to be in the room for so much stuff. So you really are just sitting there, fly on the wall, watching these characters say and do things, and the movie never spells out their intentions fully. So we're going to get into an A to B breakdown now. Overall, I do recommend this movie. It is kind of messy though. Like, be braced for it. Just kind of like go with it. I recommend it. I'm one of the few people that recommends it, but really this video is going to be a spoiler discussion, A to B analysis and breakdown, so we're going to get into that now. But before we get into spoilers, if you're enjoying this video, please consider getting a membership to this channel. For the cost of a couple of dollars a month, you get access to a weekly podcast where I talk about every single show and movie I've watched, stuff on the shelf, stuff on streaming, stuff I've seen at the cinemas that I don't have time to cover on the main channel, or I can't for whatever reason. It's all there. I really enjoy doing it. It's a really good way to give back to the channel, and I think it's great content for you guys. Thank you so much. Now let's break down After the Hunt. All right, so After the Hunt, it kind of opens with Alma starting her day. We see that she's a college professor. We then open with like text that is styled after Woody Allen, which feels like a deliberate send up of older generations' attitudes and beliefs. I've seen some people being like, oh, this is a tribute to Woody Allen. Luca Guadagnino is saying like, oh my God, like they fucked over my boy. It didn't land that way for me as such, although I have seen in the background, and I'll fact check this now, but I have seen that maybe he does actually look up to Woody Allen. But I didn't take, given what we see in this movie, I don't think this is a tribute to Woody Allen. I took this as a send up, a poke at the idea that like Woody Allen would not be able to operate the way he used to. But that's how I took it. Regardless, open with this very cringy debate. We open with this scene at Alma's house party where all these professors are all like waxing philosophical and all these like musings, and it's meant to be pretentious. I think it's meant to be full of itself and dumb. I've seen a lot of people kind of like reject this movie and be completely repelled by it, by the philosophy. I think they think that it's like some cool sort of like that shows the youngins. But I always thought, like, even before I'd read the discourse around this movie, when I watched it, I was like, okay, so these professors are meant to be insufferable and cringe. They're making talking points that like 17-year-olds would make online in a Ben Shapiro comment section. Like, this isn't profound, this isn't that new, this is all cringe on every side. We find out Maggie's thesis is on performative discontent, which I find really interesting because throughout the movie it feels like maybe she wanted a little more performative discontent from those around her. I think it's really interesting that that's what her thesis is on, or that's what she seems to be exploring, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Again, we're going A to B. Now, it's interesting, a pivotal plot point that comes later is the idea that Maggie might have forged or plagiarized her dissertation, right? So we see Andrew Garfield's character Hank. We're introduced to Hank, who is a professor. He's not teaching Alma, but he's a bit onto her from what I understand. But here on rewatch, you can't tell if he's been really inquisitive here because he's trying to catch her out for plagiarizing or because he's been flirty. My honest read of this situation is I think the plagiarism idea is kind of irrelevant in my opinion. I think the way these characters use it feels like something to fall back on when their morals are being questioned, when they're being accused of other things. And I think they kind of toy with, they choose when to care about it is kind of my point. So I still think Hank's just being purely flirty here. There is an interesting moment though. Maggie is then kind of uncomfortable by the whole situation. She's like, I need to use the bathroom. And then Hank goes, because you need to, and it's an interesting moment where like Maggie is obviously questioned on her intentions throughout the movie. And it's an interesting little micro example of such, but it's also interesting that, yeah, she didn't really need to go to the bathroom and she does go and snoop in Alma's bathroom, almost like she knew something was there, but I don't think that's the case. We also hear this conversation about tenure. Now, as a young Australian who doesn't work at a college, I was like, what the fuck is tenure when I first saw this movie? So I Googled it, and it's this idea of being granted lifetime employment. So it's almost implying that you're like above these problems that could take you out on a normal level. Like that's what I found Alma's sort of pursuit of tenure represent, this idea that she'd be able to almost levitate above all this petty squabbling. And I'm not saying all of this is petty. Some of this is really dark, tragic stuff. But to me, it almost feels like she wants to be in a place of tenure because no matter how she feels, no matter where she lands, she's guaranteed something. It's not in jeopardy, you know? And we see throughout this movie that it is kind of in jeopardy. Anyway, so in a moment that could feel contrived, but again, it's just like this movie is such a just go with it sort of thing. Maggie just starts kind of snooping in Alma's bathroom and she finds this envelope full of Alma's weird, dirty, dark secrets. Now, I will say, in terms of secret hiding spots, it's simultaneously a good hiding spot in the sense of like, yeah, Frederick, if he's looking for something, probably isn't going to find it there. But also at the same time, like for randoms who are like maybe looking for like Q-tips or something, slightly odd, but whatever. Like Maggie almost seemed to instinctively know that Alma would have a secret and it would be there. You just kind of need to go with it. In a way, it almost acts as this interesting, like sort of divine moment, but I don't know if the script's trying to do that or not. But I will say, this is either the world's biggest coincidence. If you believe Maggie's story, this is an absolutely wild coincidence. The idea that she found evidence of something dark, sinister sexually in Alma's past, and then that same night she's assaulted by Hank. It's either the world's biggest coincidence or it adds credence to the idea that maybe there's some exaggeration or some lies from Maggie. Now, I will say overall, I do lean favorably to Maggie, minus some notes. I think this movie is very much interrogating the idea of a perfect victim. Maggie is very much an imperfect victim. She is a bit icky at times. Sometimes her motivations feel strange, but I do think something did happen between her and Hank. But we'll get there. Like, we're going to explore that throughout the movie. And I just want to say from the jump, even though we're going to be exploring these ideas, I don't believe a victim obviously needs to be perfect to be a victim, but that is something the movie is exploring, just so you guys know. We cut back to this conversation between Alma and Hank, and it's cringe. It's just cringe about how like, oh, every philosopher would be cancelled. This one was incestuous. This one had issues with women. Like, imagine if we applied modern day standards to them now. It's like, yeah, okay. Now, this random weeb kid says to Alma that she's definitely going to get tenure because she's a woman, and talks about the idea that like men are now in the position women were, where they need to fight harder than women because the pendulum is swung the other way, essentially, right? Maggie is back from the bathroom and she says that society is pretending to not care about straight men as much as they used to, but they still kind of do. Anyways, after all is said and done, there's this conversation between Alma and her husband, Frederick, where he says, you know, you tend to elevate people that worship you, referencing the idea that he thinks Maggie is a mediocre student that Alma is kind of elevating because she seems to almost have a crush on Alma, or kind of is infatuated with her, or just respects her power. We don't know for certain yet, but there does feel like there's some sort of sexual undertones or implications in what he's saying. Alma then pushes back and says to Frederick, no, Maggie is a brilliant student. I think this is an important moment because when it suits these characters, they will champion Maggie, but when it doesn't, they go the other direction. direction and they'll lean down the route of plagiarism, etc. Anyways, we have this really weird moment where everyone just kind of like kisses each other. Like, I'm not the morality police, okay? Like, I'm not saying any of these people should be arrested, but just like strange, like Alma kisses Maggie, then Maggie kisses Frederick, and then Hank kisses Alma. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Now, I will say there's this moment where Alma looks through the peephole as Hank and Maggie, which is this professor played by Andrew Garfield, and Maggie, this young student. She sees them walk off, and I will say, if I was looking at this, I would get the impression they were going to go home and smash. It did feel a little flirty. Did feel a little like, oh my God, no. Like, don't follow me in the bathroom. Oh my God. Oh, right? Like, there is a little of that. And they reference as such later in the movie. Then a weirdly important thing, we're introduced to like Alma's vague illness. I think it might be something like stomach ulcers. They seem to get worse as she gets stressed. So we're introduced to this thing that occasionally makes her like bend over and go, oh, a lot. Now, we have an interesting moment. After this, we see Maggie alone. She's clearly rattled. She's just had a shower. She's got a little shower towel hat on thing. She does seem rattled. She does seem scared, but then we look down and there's a couple of different things going on, especially if you're rewatching this movie. There's some interesting stuff to note. We see drinks for both her and Hank there, but more importantly, while she might be looking at the drinks, feel like maybe she was spiked. I think later Hank suggested that she might have put something in his drink. Doesn't matter though. More importantly than looking at the two drinks, which I think is what you'll see initially when you first watch the movie, she's also looking at her work. She's looking at what I assume is a copy of her dissertation or her thesis. So it's like, is she looking at the drinks because maybe that's where everything went wrong and Hank then took advantage of her? Or is she looking at this work that she might have plagiarized, which might have been her motivation if she has made it up to make it up? Now, I think it's good storytelling here, good visual storytelling here, but only good visual storytelling that you would see on a rewatch. And I think it's going to land for most people as, oh, something bad has happened between her and Hank. I think it's hard to say you would have known the importance of this shot fully with the dissertation below up until a second watch. So it's stuff I appreciate. Alma in her class is talking about this idea of judging individuals on like an individual level rather than this form of collective justice, which I guess is interesting. And we see that is what people do throughout this movie. Everyone has their own take on what justice is. Everyone has their own take on like what this character deserves or what this character did. And this idea of collective justice just doesn't quite land. You see there's a divide. You also see the dynamic between Frederick and Alma, right? Even though they're married, she's kind of knocking boots with Hank. He's like, oh, do you want to come home and have some of this food I've made? She's not interested. But then Hank is like, want to come for drinks? And she's like, hell yeah. I will say, and maybe this is because I'm an avid Diet Coke Zero drinker, but I noticed that Alma's walking around drinking full strength Coke, which I feel like as people get older, they normally make the pivot to Diet Coke or Coke Zero, right? So I think there's a little thing here in the fact that she's drinking full strength Coke, but also throughout the movie, she's seen snacking. She's eating Milk Duds in this scene. Towards the end of the movie, she's eating Reese's Pieces. I think this informs a revelation we have later about something that went down with Alma when she was younger. Maybe part of her retains this younger sort of identity where she would like eat snacks all the time. I don't know. You get what I mean? It's not something you would typically see in someone like Julia Roberts' character in this movie as this sort of like clean posed professor. Does that make sense? Maybe this is a reach, but it's just an interesting detail I noticed throughout the movie that she's kind of snacky in a way that spits in the face of the kind of performative sophistication the rest of these people have. I'm not shaming her though. Like I would be like that too, but like I feel like you guys would expect that from me, you know, not her as much. Now, while Alma and Hank are getting drinks at the bar, he does say something a little odd. All right, I will say. Now, yes, if we go by his account that he just confronted her about plagiarizing the thing, maybe that's why he's asking, but he's sitting there and he goes, did you talk to Maggie today? Which, it does feel a little odd. It does feel a little suspicious, right? We know this is coming. If you know the premise of the movie, you know that an accusation is coming his way. So it does feel like a little odd thing to say. So Alma gets home from drinks with Hank, and outside her apartment is a soaking wet, shaken up Maggie. Now, again, I think this feels genuine to me. She feels genuinely shaken and scared. But at the same time, there's almost part of me of like, did you not grab an umbrella? Were you just waiting? Like, you're inside now. So were you intentionally making yourself wet to look more frazzled? I don't know. Like, this is on rewatch, the headspace the movie gets you in, where it's like, on initial watch, I 100% took Maggie's word for everything, minus a few moments where I was like, oh, that landed a little strange. But I think on rewatch, it feels like the movie is kind of pivoting you to question these sort of things. And look, I believe Maggie, but at the same time, like I was sitting there in this moment being like, how'd you get this level of what the hell? But anyways, I don't know. There are some moments where even if you believe Maggie, it feels like maybe there's some sort of like theatricality to what she's doing to make sure people believe her. I think that's what I'm trying to get at here. I believe Maggie, but I also believe there are certain moments where she's trying to kind of position people a certain way. And we'll get to that when we get to that. For example, the conversation she's about to have with Alma, there are moments where I'm totally with her and there are moments where I'm like, okay, that was a little strange. So Maggie now talks to Alma. She says that Hank was drunk. He was asking inappropriate questions, asking about Alex, and then he started kissing her. She said that he kept going when she said no. He kept going when I said no. And then she had a shower afterwards because she was like pretty rattled. Now, Alma asks what exactly happened, which might be a little bit of a cold thing to say, but I did actually get why she was asking that. I think given what she went through when she was younger, we really understand why she's asking that. But even in this moment, I sort of got it. It's obviously not ideal. It reminds me of these situations where it's like, yes, there could be a little more empathy here, but I think she's trying to get some clarification. I think to me, it landed as maybe a little cold, but I think she is trying to believe Maggie. She smells a little bit of bullshit, or she's not fully convinced, and maybe Alma is projecting her own dynamics she had when she was younger, which we will get to when we get to, into this conversation with Maggie. But I didn't think personally Alma came off that bad. She could have been more empathetic. She could have been softer, but also knowing who Alma is throughout this movie, I'm surprised Maggie is so taken aback. She is quite a cold person always, you know?
What are you saying happened?
What do you mean?
What are you saying he did?
Isn't it obvious? He crossed the line. He kept going after I said no.
But what actually happened?
Why do you need to know? He assaulted me. Does it need to get worse than that? Do you need to hear it?
Does anyone else know?
So yeah, Alma says what actually happened. Like, give me specific details, which I personally, I don't know. I don't want to be like a shit guy here, but I think is a relevant question to ask, especially given the fact what Maggie is asking Alma to do later in the movie, which is be a witness in court. I'm like, yeah, these are relevant questions to ask. I think also she's probably not as shocked as other people would be given what she went through when she was younger, which comes up later. So it's sort of like shocking that Maggie isn't piecing this together as such. I think Maggie feels very entitled to a certain softness from Alma given what she knows, but it's like Alma doesn't know that Maggie knows this, and it's just weird that Maggie is kind of expecting a certain response. Like, yes, Alma could have handled it better, but it's also like you'd think there'd be some understanding of like, okay, Alma's probably getting triggered herself, or also maybe Alma's been through this, so she's just not as taken aback as other people would be because she knows this is part of life to an extent. So yeah, very interesting, messy stuff. Alma says, why'd you come to me? Maggie says, given your history, I felt like it made sense to go to you, which implies that what she read in the note speaks to a sexual trauma in her past. And you see that Alma is a bit like, hang on, what the fuck do you, what's going on here? And then she backtracks. Maggie backtracks and says, oh no, because you're a woman. So at this point, we're sitting here as an audience going, okay, Maggie is bullshitting a little and being a bit dishonest about certain parts. Now that doesn't invalidate the whole story, but the motivation, things start to feel a little messy and murky. There's a point where Maggie is struck by the fact that Alma had additional questions. She wasn't instantly believed. It didn't follow this idea of believe women inherently. You can tell Maggie is taking some pause. And on one end, if what happened to Maggie is entirely true, I get her being rattled and completely shattered and broken. But at the same time, I don't think this is a full condemnation of Alma as a character or Alma as a woman. I think Alma came from a different generation, and I think she's entitled to have a little more questions. And at the same time, like the way Maggie presents certain information maybe didn't lend itself to be instantly fully understood. I mean, to me, the points where Alma asked follow-up questions felt relatively natural to me. Again, maybe not the most empathetic thing ever, but Alma isn't a therapist. She's like a professor who is trying to get clarifying questions so she knows how to feel about the situation. And again, probably applying some extra skepticism due to what she did when she was younger. There is probably some projection going on here. I will say it's pretty telling though. In the next scene, Alma sits with Frederick and says, have you ever disagreed with a patient about something sensitive? So it almost seems like Alma is either subconsciously confirming here that she doesn't quite buy Maggie's story, or maybe disagrees with certain parts of how she's going about it. I thought this was fairly illuminating, but then throughout the movie we see other moments where it feels like Alma is wanting to believe Maggie. For me, how it landed is Alma doesn't truly fully believe Maggie yet. in that moment where they had the conversation and the scene after where she asked Frederick this question. But to me, what landed as she wants to believe Maggie. I think she wants to console Maggie. She wants to believe Maggie. It's not quite landing fully yet. Maybe she's overly skeptical, but that's what it feels like to me. And then says, I wonder if I can be cold sometimes or a bit unfeeling. So it does feel like maybe she is actually worried about how she came across and thinks she could have handled it better. And I think both can be true, right? Like maybe you don't fully believe something, but you are trying to. And I think that's what it felt like to me with Alma. I think there is a lack of genuine empathy for Alma throughout this movie, in my opinion, particularly from Maggie, which I find really interesting and we'll get to as we get to. Anyways, next, Alma goes to see Hank at the Indian restaurant. And I think this is where we can kind of add some charity to Alma here, because she really rubs against Hank, really pushes back at him, really interrogates him for a lot of the shitty things he does. I think this is a really good scene, by the way. This is where I went, hang on, this movie's kind of cooking. I'm kind of enjoying this. Alma seems genuinely pissed at Hank. At the very least, she sees him as stupid for, putting himself in a position to get a false accusation. But more importantly, I think she sniffs out that at the very least, something sexual did go down or was attempted to go down. And I think she just thinks he's a fucking idiot. And like, what the hell are you doing? And like, you feel that from the start. I think Hank digs himself a massive hole. Now, to add some charity to Hank, personally, I do think he did something fucked up. Do I think it was a full-on hold them down sort of like violent sexual assault? No. But do I think he was coercive? Do I think it was essentially a betrayal of boundaries, a betrayal of trust? Do I think he did something fairly fucked up? Absolutely. And at the end of the day, no means no. If you push against that, right, whether it's a super violent assault or something where the person goes limp and just gives up, both of them are fucking terrible. But I do think maybe Hank has like convinced himself like, oh, that was like a fairly consensual encounter that just took some convincing. That's where it sort of lands for me. I don't think this is like a movie about a false accusation ruining a good man's life. I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think he has his idea of what went down. And it's different to what Maggie says go down. But the way he sort of focuses on different things throughout this conversation feels particularly relevant to me. But in saying that, if Hank didn't do anything wrong, I'd get why he's pissed. But even the way he's coming off here, something just doesn't feel right about it. So first he's going on about how everything about this feels like a cliche. I'm making myself a victim. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. I mean, I'm probably guilty. When he says it's not true, it just lands as odd. It lands as false. I think there is some truth to it.
Cliches here. In fact, everything about this feels like a fucking cliche. And I know everything I say has been said before. Therefore, I'm guilty by association. It's not true. No, it's not.
Maybe not fully what Maggie said, but at the same time, maybe Maggie was sort of convinced into a sexual encounter and then the next day went, hang on, that was really fucked up. Plowed me with drinks. He held this like plagiarism over my head and threatened me to a point where I felt like I couldn't say no. And now that I've woken up with a clear mind, I'm like, what the fuck was that about? You know what I mean? So even if that's what went down, it's like Hank's still a fucking menace, right? So yes, Hank's whole demeanor in this scene lands as odd and off-putting and frankly guilty. Now Hank brings up a separate incident. He brings up this idea that like months ago, he found out that Maggie was cheating. Now I will say this part seems to be true. The way he's delivering it here, I was like, yeah, I'm buying that. I'm buying what you're selling. But then he says that he believes her dissertation was forged, was plagiarized. And I find this scene interesting because I don't think he gives a fuck, except for the fact that now it adds a cool motivation for her to have like lied about an assault if she did lie, right? Like, I don't think he cares that much. I think this is entirely something that is becoming relevant now because he's trying to defend himself. I don't think he ever cared. And I think when he says like, oh, I only went back to her place to confront her about this, it's like, as Alma says, like, why would you have done that? Why would you go back? She's not even your, like, who cares? What are you doing? And it's like, yeah, I think he went back because I think he wanted to smash. And then he was like, okay, she doesn't want to smash. Now I'm going to go for the plagiarism thing. That's how it lands to me personally. Alma then like pokes at him and she's like, so when you brought it up at dinner and said it was really good or really interesting, like you just wanted to see what she said. And you can see he feels a little caught out here. You can see he's a bit like, oh shit, that doesn't line up with my story fully. At least that's how it lands to me. So yeah, my stance is I do think she's cheated before, or at least it seemed like she's cheated before. And I think he used this dissertation to get to her apartment. I think that was the goal first. Whether she plagiarized or not is secondary to, you know, him having sex with her or him trying to have sex with her or whatever happened that night. He then talks about how like the parents donated half the campus. He says, you know, there's a way she said to me that their partner was out of town. It felt like she was coming on to me. And I will say maybe there is, I'm not saying that he's definitely off the hook, but maybe there is some truth in the idea that he perceives something as a come on. Like, there is a good possibility that Hank was drunk as fuck and genuinely convinced himself that something was consensual. But at the point where you're ignoring no's, like, I don't know about that, man. So again, this movie adds enough doubt to the idea that Maggie has reason to have lied completely and made this up completely. But the way Hank is acting here, and it doesn't look good for him. It doesn't look good for him. You know, his defense is that he needed to let her know directly that she would be held accountable for plagiarizing. It's like, really? And then his like fake crocodile tears don't feel convincing at all. And like, if you're mad for a false accusation, be mad, but there's something about how insincere this moment feels that just doesn't land for me. He then says this lying little bitch with too much money is gonna fuck with me. So again, to me, what it feels like is he had a gross, pushy, boundary crossing sexual exploit with her, or attempted sexual exploit. He's now denying it completely because given any truth to it validates her more serious and stern accusation. So he's like, I'm gonna deny it completely. That's how it kind of lands to me. I think there is some truth, a fair amount of truth to Maggie's accusation. And I think the fact that she didn't want to clarify specific details means she didn't want to have the questions of like, oh, could you have pushed him off? Could you have stopped it? Like, was part of you trying to like distract him from, like, I think she knows, I think similar to what we find out with Alma later in the movie, this idea of like, part of me egged certain things on, or part of me could have done this better or done that better. I think Maggie knows she's going to be framed as an imperfect victim and not be viewed as a victim at all. So she would rather like keep it vague between Alma and her in that conversation and let people fill in the gaps and assume the worst ever situation possible and accuse Hank as such. We then cut to this scene between Alma and Maggie where Alma says, hey Maggie, I just want to apologize. I reacted poorly. It's not easy news to hear. I think this is a relatively earnest apology. I think she's doing the right thing here. I will say Maggie's response being like, well, imagine telling it. It feels, there's this weird feeling to Maggie, all right, throughout the movie where it starts to feel like a power trip or a power play. And I know that's like not a nice thing to say, but I'm just being honest. I think the way it's written is meant to land a little this way. There are moments where she seems to be kind of enjoying the power that is being gained through this. And I think this movie is dealing with a lot of situations of both can be true. You know what I mean? Like, maybe she did plagiarize, but also maybe Hank did assault her. Both can be true. And I think in this situation, maybe did something genuinely happen to her, but maybe her motivations throughout the movie become a little mutilated and twisted as she has to deal with other people's mutilated and twisted motivations. She then says she has a right to these spaces. Then she also says she needs the lecture credit. She then says that she's going to press charges. Now, Alma, again, like maybe not the nicest thing, but she asks fairly relevant questions where she says, did you go to a clinic? Did you get like DNA swabs? Did you get photos done? She then tells this story that, I'm going to be honest, like it sounds a little bullshitty. Like I get it, all right? And again, like I get how this happened, but it's just this situation where you're like picturing it in court being like, fucking hell. So she talks about how she went and she walked up to the clinic, but then there was a group of guys staring at her and she panicked. She saw a security camera though, so it might have footage of her. And, you know, they'll have the footage of her walking up to Alma's house, so surely that will be enough. And you can see even Alma is like, I don't know about that. Alma then says that she believes Maggie. And at this point, I believe Maggie too. But at the same time, there are things that aren't looking good for an actual court case, you know? So it's like, I believe her. Anyways, next we have this scene where Hank bursts into Alma's class. Similar sort of take I have with the Indian restaurant. It's like, if for some reason this has been a total stitch up and he didn't do anything wrong, or it was a consensual encounter or whatever happened, right? Like, I get why he'd be feeling fucked over, but most likely he did fuck up. He did do something very, very wrong, and it's just kind of embarrassing to watch. He says to Alma that she believed him but has lied to save herself, and Alma pushes back on this and says, you've done this to yourself. And yeah, I don't think Alma believes Hank, to be honest. I think Alma believes that something went down between Maggie and Hank, and I think Alma has her own personal thoughts on feeling. I think Alma has her own personal thoughts and feelings on Maggie's motivation and Maggie's imperfect victim status, right? Like, Alma has her own thoughts about Maggie, and again, there is probably some self-insertion and some self-projection, but at the same time, I think she looks at Hank and it's like, yeah, you did something stupid. Look at today's social climate. Like, whether Alma is completely repulsed by Hank or not is secondary to the fact that Alma is looking at Hank in this moment being like, you fucking idiot. Like, what are you doing? You know, we're in like a post-Me Too age. Why would you have thought that was a good idea? Like, whether it's true or not is like why would you have done that? Are you fucking stupid? You know, that's the vibe that I get from this scene. I will say though, they cut back to this look with Maggie, and again, I'm not trying to like villainize Maggie fully, but this is where we start seeing some cracks. The way she's responding here, she seems a little more guilty than I would expect, than like scared or sad with Hank. Now, later we get a different scene, but yeah, it seems like the camera's focusing on her here with a bit of skepticism in this moment. I'm curious how it lands for you. Again, if we're being charitable, maybe it's just an uncomfortable situation. She doesn't know how to hold herself, of course, but at the same time, there does feel like there's this skeptical lens at times throughout this movie towards Maggie. Hank starts dropping philosophy quotes, which is just cringe as. I will say though, like as I was saying, Maggie seems genuinely distraught by the tree, like genuinely distraught at the tree. So I don't know. But then when they're hugging, her cold demeanor kind of comes back, and she's kind of looking at this statue and almost seemingly wanting to take down the system. Like there's this look of like from like real broken young girl to sort of like again, a weird moment. It's like obviously the movie wants you to be questioning all this stuff, but yeah, we have this really interesting scene where Frederick has made dinner for Maggie and Alma because Maggie is coming over to talk to Alma. And he's really pissed off that Maggie is late. And on one end, I sort of get it, except for the circumstance. Like, if the circumstances are true, it's a bit like, okay, give her a fucking break. But yeah, interesting moment with Frederick. And I think Frederick resents this idea that Alma does elevate these people she's attracted to or worship her. And she's looking at this situation being like, I bet you wouldn't wait for me, but you're waiting for Maggie. Like, what the hell is this? Maggie talks about her thesis or what she's writing about being about virtue ethics. Now, Frederick says, what drew you to that? Now, Frederick comes off a little assholey here and there. I also think Maggie comes off fairly defensive. They're kind of like feeding each other at this moment. I do think Frederick starts it, but I can't tell if he's trying to genuinely be inquisitive, but just coming off insincere, and she picked up on that. But I mean, by the end of it, like they're all framing Frederick as an asshole in this scene. Personally, I kind of like Frederick in a weird way, but like, yeah, this scene, he's definitely been strange. I think he's kind of perturbed by the motivation of this whole thing. He plays this like crazy song over the speakers after excusing himself. Absolutely hypnotic section where he's coming in and out of the kitchen and the music starts blaring. If you're watching this at home with good volume, it's a really, really interesting section.
What do you think?
So this is where Maggie starts talking about, I'm not going to say the clout she's received, but this like attention she's kind of got. And you're sort of seeing there being like, this is such a strange talking point. Like I was sitting here in this movie thinking about Sorry Baby. I'm not sure how many of you have seen Sorry Baby, but I was sitting there thinking like, how would ever Victor be watching this movie and experiencing this movie? Like, I don't know. Like I was also seeing there. So for those of you who don't know, Sorry Baby is a movie about a woman who is assaulted by her college professor. And I mean, the way she responds to the situation is so like lived in and raw and emotional. And then I'm watching Maggie in this scene caring about like DMs and journalist clout. And I'm just like, I don't know. Again, like maybe this is what the movie's reckoning with, society's need for a perfect victim. Maybe I'm not saying that she's a bad person, but I was sitting there in this moment being like, these are such like just in the wake of such a horrific, violent thing that you're accusing Hank of, and that I'm going on good faith with you about being true. Like I am also sitting there being like, this just feels like such a strange conversation to have. And maybe it's the system she's a part of, the fact that everyone's DMing her and hounding her for interviews, but the conversation itself just feels really strange and insincere, and we get that throughout the movie. Yeah, Maggie says, I didn't expect this to blow up so much. People have been DMing me. I've got a reporter coming up to me. Alma then says a realistic but really cold, harsh truth where she says, if you press charges, you will become radioactive. White men won't hire you. They'll be scared you're going to do the same thing to them. It's not your work. People will say it's the victimhood. Now, this is obviously, times have changed a little, but not fully, all right? So I think there is some truth to what Alma is saying here. But I also think there's some projection given why Alma did and didn't do certain things when she was younger, right? I think there's a bit of like, okay, well, here's how it went down for me. Here's how I feel. I think she's almost trying to protect Maggie from the same fate she has put on herself without realizing that that is entirely something that's constructed by herself. But I mean, we'll get there when we get there too, because there's a little more nuance there as well. We see that Maggie's hands throughout this scene are super unsettled. I think there is this idea where Maggie is really upset that she doesn't get the perfect response from people when she lays out the horrific things that she's talking about, that she's alleging. On one end, if you think that she's lying, it's just this idea of like, okay, I thought I was a victim. What the hell is this? This isn't the attention I wanted. But at the same time, maybe there's some fragility here. She's confused that these situations, these conversations aren't going the way she would have expected based off like current Me Too discourse or whatever, right? Like, I think she's seen there being like, hang on, like, I've told you this thing and you're not doing this thing. Like, what is going on? She starts seeing there being like, so he gets to do what he did and he gets to go on and relocate to other universities and sleep with other students. Now, this might be a Freudian slip, maybe just not perfect use of language, but I did think this wording was notable. The idea that she's saying sleeping with other students rather than the R word, right? Like that, I feel like if you were assaulted, that might be your go-to. But again, I don't know. I'm not trying to say we need a perfect victim, but I did think this was notable. And I do wonder if it means that the situation that went down between Hank and Maggie is one where Hank is still wrong, but it's one more of an abuse of power, one more of like a, hey, if we sleep together, I'll forget this whole plagiarizing thing. And he positioned her. Again, either way, it's bad, but maybe that's why Maggie is coming off a little not convincing or a little incongruent on times. Maybe it's because she's seen there being like, okay, like, I was coerced and I did sleep with him when I didn't want to, but there was also some part of that was for my own gain. And like, do I really have a case against him? And the answer is yes. Maybe she's asking similar questions to what Alma was asking herself, right? This idea of like, this idea of part of me was gaining something or part of me wanted something from this dynamic. Does that mean I can't then hold them accountable for what they did to me? That's something that we know Alma is going through by the end of the movie. And maybe that's what's going on here with Maggie. Or maybe everything Maggie has said is true. She was blatantly assaulted by Hank. There's no other nuance or anything to it. And she's just a little frazzled and confused. Like, that could be what's going on too. She says, am I not owed this? This happened to me. Which I think speaks to this movie's sort of exploration of victimhood and entitlement and the way everyone sort of responds differently to these situations. Alma then says, what you want is restorative justice and what you're getting is vengeance. And it's this sort of question of like, does it really matter? Like, does that change the pursuit? Does that make it a less moral or noble thing to be doing? I don't know. Now, I will say, I've seen people say that this movie is purely like kind of critiquing younger generations for being soft. I don't really think that's what it's doing. I don't think it's that simple. We then have this scene, right, where the therapist and Alma, I think her name is Kat, played by Chloe Sevigny, but the therapist and Alma go to the bar, the college therapist, and there's like this bathroom about like, oh, genderless bathroom, so you don't know who's pissing on the floor. Like, I think it's meant to feel a little okay boomer, is it not? And then they're talking about like, oh, they're playing the Smiths and they're playing these other old songs. Fuck yeah. I think they're meant to feel like a little like dinosaurs,
Who keeps playing this? Fuck yeah.
Now, I will say, this is kind of where I'm at. I'm with the therapist. The therapist kind of believes her. And the therapist is like, look, I think he crossed the line. She says, look, I think he crossed the line. I think at that point, the question of consent is kind of a moot point, right? So she's like, I don't know if it happened fully. She's essentially saying like, I don't know if it happened in the fullest, like worst way we can possibly imagine. But yeah, I think he like fucked up, crossed the line for sure. She then goes on this tangent where she talks about the idea of like, maybe there's like a level of just toughening up and moving on. And like, this generation insists on the world kind of stopping and supporting them. And on one end, maybe you could make the argument that this is the thesis of the movie. And maybe that's why people have really turned against the movie. But in my opinion, like the fact that they're constantly seen there being like, oh, this old timey music is great. I think it's trying to say that they're a bit out of time. I think the fact that Alma's story mirrors this idea and mirrors the idea that she should have been perfect and she insisted on a sort of like younger, older dynamic when she was younger with someone, right? And the idea that if she did that, then therefore she isn't owed any empathy or any victimhood status. I think it's meant to mirror. I think it's not meant to be a condemnation of younger generations. It's saying that we all go through the same hurts, but how we like process them is vastly different. Maybe it is changing for the better. Maybe there is some currency in victimhood. Maybe some people are manipulating that system, but overall, like, surely we're moving in a positive direction, or are we? I think that's what the movie's more so getting at. The therapist also tells Alma that Maggie talked about her lack of support, and I think this is a really interesting thread too, the way Alma is kind of persecuted seemingly more than Hank, or like Maggie really comes at Alma for not being, similar to how Maggie is interrogated for not being the perfect victim by the audience and by other characters. It almost feels like Alma is kind of like picked on for not being the perfect empath in that initial meeting. I think the way Maggie comes at Alma is pretty unfair and kind of crazy given the fact that Maggie knows what happened to Alma when she was younger. Like, it's like, can you not infer that maybe the reason she's responding strangely to this is because of what she went through when she was younger? Like, are you so naive to think that, like, oh, well, she went through a similar thing, so she would feel even better and be even more supportive, and she should be my champion? Like, I actually think Maggie, weirdly enough, and like, don't give me this shit that she's just like super young. Like, I think she comes off weirdly unempathetic for Alma in the way that she starts coming for her towards the end of the movie. Now, in a notable scene, you see Frederick kind of like put Alma's pills out by her bedside. It's assumed he's done this every morning. We saw this at the start as well. Like, occasionally you can see that Frederick is quite a good husband. I mean, he's very patient. He's letting Alma like sleep around on him. He's not sleeping with her. Like, he's a good husband. He's a strange dude, though. Frederick sees that the article is out and just kind of goes like, oh, politically, this is complicated. That's not his exact quote, but he's not sitting there being like, oh my God, is Maggie okay or anything like that. It's more this approach of like, damn, like, this is big. Alex and Maggie. So Maggie and her partner have this conversation about how the reporter called to congratulate her, talks about how it's fucked up to be congratulated. On one end, it feels like she's actually critiquing this idea. On one end, it feels like she's kind of critiquing this attention and fame, which I think is interesting because at the end of the movie, she seems to embrace and relish in it. And I think maybe this movie is an example of someone who is kind of turned into the thing they reject, right? She becomes sort of like a parallel to Alma by the end of the movie in this cold way she navigates these situations and like flippant nature in it. And I wonder if what this movie is getting at here is whether she's being insincere and having a moment of having her insincerity spat back at her, or is this a moment where she is being sincere and kind of one of the last moments she has of being like, this feels a little strange given what I went through, before she kind of goes through this metamorphosis into Alma by the end of the movie. It's interesting too, she's bummed that Alma hasn't called. She doesn't seem to care that her mum hasn't called. She's bummed that Alma hasn't called, and Alex storms off, which I found interesting. Now we have this like cross-cut section where both Alma and Maggie are translating some stuff, documents about what happened to Alma when she was younger, this like younger, older dynamic she had with an older guy. We also see Alma write false prescriptions, and you can tell that the chemist doing it almost can like suss out that these are false prescriptions. Like, she's not buying it for a second. We also have this conversation between Frederick and Alma where we find out they haven't smashed for ages, and he says, is it the beard, is it the gut, or is it because I'm in the philosophy department? And I wonder if it's because he's starting to resemble, like, he's starting to get to the age of the guy she was with when she was younger. Like, I wonder if that's it. Like, maybe he's getting older and like matching the age of the guy that she was with when she was younger. I don't know. Maybe that's just speculation. I think maybe it is a good read that he's not in the philosophy department. I don't know. All right, next, Maggie and Alex catch up in this random parking lot. And it's important to note that at this point, Maggie knows what Alma went through to an extent, all right? And fucking Maggie just comes off like an absolute psycho here. So Maggie gives Alma the note back and says, I can't help but wonder if the same thing that happened to me happened to you. And it's like, you knew that. Like, and if anything, like, looking back on this movie, it is a little weird. Like, it's like, did you read that and then, you know, that added to what happened later on? Or like, is that a massive coincidence like I suggested before? It's like, this is starting to feel fucking weird and strange. Like, I don't know, like, I think something happened with Maggie, but there's definitely this weird thing of like, either there's some idea of sort of like paralleling between the two, or maybe she was sitting there being like, okay, well, Alma did it, so I'm going to do it. I'm empowered by it. Or maybe like a charitable read would be that she was inspired by Alma coming out about her story when she was younger to do the same with Hank. An uncharitable read is that something not that bad happened and she's read Alma's article and had the idea to kind of do that. Like, it's just strange. It's strange, but strange in a good way. Strange in a way I find interesting. Alma then says, you don't know anything about me. Stop pretending you know everything about me. Fair enough. Like, Maggie's done something incredibly invasive. Then Alma goes like, whose fault is that? It's like, sorry, does she owe you like her backstory? What the hell, Maggie? So Alma says as much. She says, you're not entitled to info about me yet. And then Maggie's like, yet you have so much of mine. It's like, you volunteered this. Like, what the hell? It's also like, why are we playing like point scoring with these stories about deeply personal trauma? Like, I am genuinely asking Maggie, like, it's such a strange thing if she genuinely went through this to be like, oh, well, I told you my secret and like, you didn't tell me. Like, what the, like, we're talking about really serious, awful stuff. Like, again, I know I've tried to be charitable and be like, yes, victims don't need to be perfect. But at this point, like, victimhood or not, like very strange behavior. I thought we were close or that you had an interest in me. She like comes at Alma like they were in like a romantic relationship. So it almost feels like in a weird way, the way she's come at Hank, maybe genuinely, she's now almost coming at Alma in the same way. Like if I was Alma at this point, I would be sitting there being like, what is going on? I did want to believe you, but now you're kind of like coming at me in a similar way. And again, maybe it's because Alma didn't give her enough empathy, but like, does the punishment fit the crime here? Like, is this fair treatment towards Alma? It feels like Alma is almost being persecuted for her old stuff. And, you know, then she's projecting her own situation into the handling of Maggie. We then have this philosophy scene between like Alma and this young girl where we see that Alma's kind of losing her grip a little. Now, I will say Alma's making some decent points about the idea that like she makes some good points. This idea, like she's almost interrogating this idea of trying to be socially progressive at times is almost like counterintuitive and is condescending to certain groups. They're having this discussion about a blind poet. They're having this discussion about the blind poet, and you know, Alma references the blind poet philosophically as the other, and this young girl pushes back saying like, oh, we shouldn't be othering them. And Alma kind of crashes out, and to an extent I understand what Alma is saying. I don't think this scene is meant to land as like she fucking owned them. Like she does clearly lose her composure, but there is something interesting in there about how they're like reframing and handling the same thing. Alma is caught for the prescription forgery. Honestly, you could have cut this from the movie. I don't think it adds a whole lot. I think it's kind of a dud, to be honest. Like, I don't know, her tenure's disrupted, but by the end of the movie, things end up fine. Maybe that's the point, but not super interesting to me. We have a pretty notably funny line in the movie. Alma goes to talk to Maggie, and clearly she's pissed, all right? I guess maybe that's the point, is people get pissed about certain things and take it out, right? Hank starts caring about the plagiarism when he's in trouble. She's now in trouble. You know, Alma's in trouble because she's getting kicked off. Her tenure might be disrupted because of the forgery. So now she's like, fuck it, I'll take it out on Maggie. So she goes up to Maggie, Alex cuts in and she goes, they, go away. And yeah, total boomer dinosaur moment. I think that's what's getting at here, right? Like Alma had some patience. She was kind of in between. And now that she's kind of personally fucked up, she's like, fuck it, I'm going to spit venom at these younger people. They, go away. Like that's what it feels like to me. She's kind of like going, she's like, fuck it, I will become that dinosaur. Alma then says to Maggie, I know you have feelings for me. You're the worst type of mediocre student. Your paper is so obviously plagiarized. She goes on and on and on and on and on and on. It's interesting that this plagiarism is only brought up when people are actively upset with Maggie. Otherwise they wouldn't, right? Otherwise they wouldn't. Now they do. It's an interesting moment. Now Alma then says, not everything is meant to make you comfortable, which people have seen as like the thesis of this movie. But I actually think an equally important line is the one that comes after, where Maggie says, there's an equally important line afterwards where Maggie says, no rewards in death for those who have suffered as much as possible. Basically like shaming Alma for dealing with things internally and not bringing them outwards, and saying she's doing it better by making things public. I think it's kind of a fucked up thing to say, but this whole movie has been filled with people being fucked up, so whatever. Now, Alma roasts Maggie with what sounds like some fairly accurate readings. And it's interesting that the one thing that gets the slap is when she says, you lied about Hank. Now, it's either getting the slap because it's the one thing she's really scared about, it's the one lie, and she's scared about keeping it protected, or the slap's coming because that's such a personal thing. How could you say that after what I went through? It's an interesting moment. That's the thing that gets the slap. Now, Alma goes up to Hank, and now that she's at rock bottom and Hank's at rock bottom, they're both at rock bottom together. Suddenly, Alma is like, I knew she was plagiarized. Alma wasn't validating him before in the Indian restaurant, but now she's like, I knew she plagiarized too. To me, this felt like genuinely when someone didn't guess the twist in a movie, but then when the other person does guess the twist or whatever the twist is revealed, they're like, oh no, I knew that. I am not buying for a second. I know some people say, no, this is the smoking gun. Like this shows that Maggie was definitely lying. The fact that she's been plagiarizing from day one. This is meant to be a massive twist. I thought we were watching, to me, the way this landed is we're watching two insincere people. That's why Hank is a little shocked, being like, wait, you knew it was plagiarized? Of course she would have known it was plagiarized. She's the professor. She's smarter than Hank. She would have known if there was plagiarism. I think what's going on is Hank actually did kind of bullshit and embellish about the plagiarism. And now that Alma is in the pits, she's like, fuck it, I'll jump to the plagiarism thing too. Let's just like kind of intellectually beat her up for a second. And Hank's sort of sitting there going like, oh, fuck, like I kind of lied about that, but she's saying she knows about the, what the fuck? Alma then says to Hank she believes that he did flirt, he did cross the line, etc., which is kind of where I stand with this. I think he did definitely cross the line. I don't know if it's as serious as what Maggie is implying, but at the same time, I mean, if he did something really fucked up, cross the line to any extent, like Maggie, get that bag, you know, whatever. All right. It might land a little odd and insincere at moments, but I do think something fucked up went down. I don't know if it was the most fucked up thing, but sure, whatever. And again, like maybe I'm completely wrong. Luca Guadagnino has said it's open to interpretation, by the way. He has said no one knows except the people there that night. We don't know. I intentionally kept it vague. So whatever. I'm just going off all these different readings. Now, then we have this scene that almost confirms Hank probably did something pretty strange. He gets weirdly sexually aggressive with Alma in a certain scene, like really sort of insistent. She's like, no, stop. And on one end, maybe you could make the argument because they've smashed before, he's thinking like, oh, that's just a yes in disguise. Come on. But like at the same time, it does feel like, okay, if you're capable of that, and then Maggie was in that situation and she wasn't able to push you off and she wasn't able to be like, stop, 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 what would you have done? You know what I mean? So it does add to this idea that Hank's kind of a bit of a sexual menace. Next, Maggie has a new article out calling out Alma. And then Alma's like walking around being like, oh my God, there's a new article that's calling me out. And all these like fucking losers surround her with signs until she like passes out from her like stomach thingy. And I'm like, fuck these people. Then when someone comes over to help her, they're like, we didn't touch her. I swear no one touched her. It's like, dude, what shit people. Sorry. Like, yeah, I think at this point it is lambasting like fake performative people. Absolutely. I think this movie is, if you guys have seen the drama, I think there is an aspect to this, right? Remember Rachel in the drama where it's like, okay, you can be off put by Zendaya's secret, but there's a level to which you're taking this that feels a little performative and full on. And similarly, right, you can be disappointed with Alma's response, whatever, or you've read the article, but like the way they're treating Alma here, I'm like, what the hell? The husband reads out the article to Alma in the hospital room. And I will say Maggie's article about Alma feels vindictive, mean, nasty. It does feel like, even if there's truth in Hank's accusation, this one feels like a personal, vindictive vendetta thing. I think it's unfair, especially what she knows about Alma. Seeing that being like, she failed me as a teacher, a woman, now I'm a black woman who wanted better from a white woman. It's like, okay, you might have wanted better. Like, you genuinely might have wanted a more empathetic response, but she tried to apologize later. Yeah, she was in a tough position. I don't know, man. I don't know if this is fair, personally. She could have been better, but she could have been a hell of a lot worse. And then we kind of have something that, for the most part, reframes the movie. We knew it was being alluded to throughout the movie. You kind of got a sense something fucked up happened when Alma was younger, but she says, you know how I told you that my dad's friend assaulted me? That's not true. What actually happened was we were in love. He kissed me when I turned 15. I pursued a sexual relationship with him. I insisted on one. And then when he told me he met someone else, I made up a story because I was jealous. I said that I was assaulted. 3 years later, he took his own life. And she'd retracted the story by then. Frederick, her husband, then says, Alma was young and it's an adult's responsibility to reject her, right? He says, like, you were young, like, you didn't consent, he still did the wrong thing. Which, again, like, depending on what you're piecing together happened between Maggie and Hank, or maybe there's this idea that Maggie said yes at one point. Maybe I'll go along with it a little. It'll get me out of this plagiarism situation. And then obviously she realized, wait, this is fucked up, right? And maybe Maggie's been seeing that throughout the movie, feeling like she doesn't have a true right of victimhood, and maybe that's why she's been a little off here and there, right? I think there is a parallel going on here. But we see that all these years later, Alma still blames herself and doesn't think the man did anything wrong. She says, the truth is, I love that man. And then Frederick says, well, I love you. So I think that's interesting, right? Alma has held on to that forever. It's clearly defined who she is. It's clearly defined how she operates, how she navigated this situation with Maggie. Next, we go to this flash forward section. Alma meets Maggie in the same Indian restaurant. And Maggie is talking about this situation almost flippantly. Maybe that's what's getting at, this idea that now we have the systems where these things are handled a little better. There's more emphasis on the victim, so you can turn out the other side a lot better than, say, Alma was, holding on to all this stuff, literally causing stomach ulcers. But at the same time, if you're cynical, the way it lands is Maggie kind of like pushed something that wasn't as big a deal as she made it out to be internally to her, and was kind of like using this whole situation for her own gain. Depending how you read this movie, it's either this confusing moment where Maggie comes off cold and flippant about the whole situation, or maybe she's just truly recovered, or it feels a little sinister and weird. You know, she says, this is where Hank used to take us so off the cuff. She's just like, Sometimes I still wonder where he is. Like, she talks about the whole thing like it was just like a crazy story. It's a little odd. The way Maggie talks about Alma's writing is the same way Alma used to talk about Maggie's writing. Another interesting parallel. Maggie then says, I spent so much time wishing you'd fail, which is like, yeah, there seemed to be this like sort of bitter, vindictive nature to at least Alma. I can't speak for Hank as much, but yeah, it is interesting. And Alma is like, I know, I hurt you and I'm sorry. It seems like there is this conversation about the way different generations handle this sort of stuff, right? And the way justice is also served, right? Maggie then says, I was confused. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be you or be with you, which is like kind of a fairly big revelation to have at this point. Alma says that she lost everything, and then Maggie says, look at you now. Then we have this like moment where the bill is put on the table. Luca Guadagnino, the director, yells out cut, almost breaking the reality of the movie. I guess kind of saying like, look at how truth is manipulated. Look how I manipulated my version of the truth of all these characters of truth. Whatever, could take it or leave it, but a super interesting movie. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and consider gaining a membership to this channel. Thank you for watching. Thank you, thank you, thank you.